Welcome to part 3 in this video series. Now, the very first person besides myself that I came out to was my BFF of 36 years, Glenda. Glenda isn't a member of my family of origin, of course, but I'm including her here because she was perhaps the most critical figure in my coming out journey. Our lives crossed paths, quite fatefully, courtesy of Woodmead, a progressive, non-racial, private boarding school in Johannesburg. It was actually my eldest sister, Syra, who motivated for me to go study there and even chipped in for my school fees, since my parents could scarcely afford to send me to a private school. Fortunately, I was awarded a bursary, so we were able to afford for me to keep going there. I'd only ever attended government-mandated Indian public schools, so Woodmead was a real eye-opener for me. Now, we were still living through apartheid, so a multi-racial co-ed boarding school like Woodmead was strictly illegal and would not have been allowed to exist were it not for its generous benefactors and the largesse of good-intentioned white liberals who agreed not to publicize the school's existence and success in exchange for the authorities looking the other way. It also suited the apartheid government because Woodmead was a quality institution they could send the non-white kids of foreign diplomats to, since the quality of public schooling for black and brown South Africans was deliberately underfunded and woefully under par. So I was exposed for the first time in my life to a peer group of diverse races, ethnicities, backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses, and tastes. And it really expanded my worldview, which I'll always be grateful for. But Woodmead was not without its shortcomings. For one, my fellow students, acutely aware of the racist, bigoted society that existed beyond the school gates, were hyper-vigilant in their policing and punishment of any speech or conduct that was deemed to be even remotely racist or even sexist on campus. But brazen homophobia? Oh, you know, boys will be boys. Stop taking yourself so seriously. Lighten up. I found that curious disconnect and cognitive dissonance to be both frustrating and kind of comical at the same time. I mean, heaven help you if you dared to commit a racial microaggression against a marginalized or historically oppressed group, but when it came to punching down on the gays, yeah, knock yourself out. I mean, it's not like gay people have historically suffered persecution or anything like that, right? I mean, it's so telling that when people justifiably inveigh against the horrors of the Holocaust, many of them ever so conveniently gloss over the annihilation of gay men under Nazi Germany. In fact, gay men were at the bottom of the concentration camp hierarchy and especially subjected to castration, medical experimentation, rape, and murder. Now, I want to exempt Woodmead's faculty members from this hypocrisy because my teachers were all so amazing and cool. Not once did I pick up on any homophobic vibes from any of them. Special shout out to Miss Watson, Mr. Painter, and Lloyd Smuts. Mwah. Now, when I got to Woodmead, I found myself on the receiving end of a lot of unexpected positive attention from female students in particular. Because, well, I was kind of cute and had a very bold fashion sense. Woodmead didn't mandate any dress codes or school uniforms, so students came to classes in their civvies and were free to express their individuality through their dress and appearance. And as someone who'd always been interested in clothing and fashion, I was having the time of my life, honing my individual sense of style with clever, cheap bargain buys at the Oriental Plaza. Of course, this sartorial flair, combined with the keen interest from all the pretty girls, painted a huge target on my back, especially when it came to my male peers. But despite the curiosity surrounding me, I was very wary of making friends because I'd always been a loner, and as I said, there was an explicitly homophobic vibe within the student body, especially in the boys' dormitories, where I was constantly singled out for harassment by my uncouth fellow roomies. In fact, things got so bad that I was eventually given my own room by the boarding masters, much to my relief. So I just threw myself into my studies and kept to myself a lot. But Glenda, for some reason that she still can't quite explain to this day, just knew that we were going to be friends no matter what. I believe there was something about my energy that drew her to me, and she sought out my company and pursued our friendship with the kind of certitude, enthusiasm, and unflagging determination that I found both flattering and a little overwhelming at the same time. I mean, I was this broody, angsty, intense introvert who preferred to keep to himself and be in his own head, and she was this cheerful soul with a lightness of spirit and a boundlessly sunny disposition that shone so bright it bordered on sunstroke. I just couldn't understand what she saw in me that compelled her to want to get to know me so intimately, but sunset after sunset, Glenda would seek me out at my usual spot, which very quickly became our spot. Alongside the school campus ran the Yuxke River, and there was this large boulder beside it that I would retire to every afternoon after classes to watch the sun go down and be in my HSP thoughts and ruminations. The roaring sound of the water used to really soothe me, so my rock became my happy place. Glenda would invariably find me there, ask if she could join me, and then strike up a conversation. Because of all the trauma and bullying I had endured up until that point, I had put up quite a formidable suit of armor around myself, so I was very guarded and not very forthcoming at first. But as the months wore on, Glenda slowly wore my defenses down. As I said, she was so cheerfully disarming, sincere, and persistent. Anyway, one day the thought crossed my mind while Glenda and I were both watching a particularly romantic sunset over the Yuxke that her keen interest in me might be sexual in nature, and because I liked her as a person and certainly didn't wish to lead her on or hurt her feelings after all her kindnesses towards me, I thought it was time to let her know that I was gay. And honestly, she was so chilled, unfazed, and welcoming of it that I actually felt foolish for having not told her sooner. Up until that moment, I'd never taken another living soul into confidence about being gay, so I didn't realize what an enormous load gets immediately lifted off your shoulders when you do so for the first time. I felt so much lighter and freer all of a sudden. So if you're watching this as someone who hasn't come out to even a single person, I cannot recommend enough that you come out to someone, anyone, even if it's a stranger on the other end of a helpline. It's incredibly liberating and such a load off. And it emboldens you for the next coming out, whenever that is for you. Because you never stop coming out as LGBTQ+. But the good news is, it gets easier and less stressful each time. But Glenda didn't stop at mere respectful acknowledgement. She demonstrated true acceptance. She held space for me to talk about it more, and believe me, once I let that genie out of the bottle, I couldn't stop talking about it. And I'll always be grateful to Glenda for that, because unlike some superficially accepting friends who will say insensitive things like, okay, you're gay, that's fine, but I don't need to hear any more about it, a truly thoughtful, patient, compassionate, and genuinely caring friend like Glenda was and still is to me will give you the floor so you can unpack your hopes, dreams, aspirations, and even fears and anxieties. By the way, if you're LGBTQ+ and out to a straight friend who tells you all about his or her relationship with their partner, their day-to-day, kids, domestic and sex life, etc., but then turns around and accuses you of shoving your sexuality down their throat when you dare to share some aspect of your personal life, then maybe it's time to shop around for a better friend, because this person ain't it. Anyway, with Glenda as a witness to my mental vision board, if you will, I was able to dare to imagine and visualize the life I wanted for myself as a gay man, and to say it out loud for the very first time, which was so empowering and emboldening. She shared her romantic hopes and dreams with me too, and we would talk for hours at a time about all manner of things, and absolutely nothing was off limits or met with any kind of judgment or censure. Fun fact, the very first time I went to a gay club, Glenda was my wingman or wingwoman. I remember it was literally the first time I saw two men making out in real life, and it was such an incongruous and jarring sight that I thought my brain was going to explode. Glenda lives in Australia now with her wonderful husband Neil and their 4 children, but we still have epic hours-long video chats. 36 years later, we still haven't run out of new things to talk about. Everyone should be so lucky to have such a friendship. I wish it for all of you. And then the movie Maurice, or rather Morris, came into my life. I think every LGBTQ+ person has their defining or seminal book, movie, or TV series. and the Merchant Ivory film adaptation of E.M. Forster's book of the same name was mine, and I'm sure that of many others of my generation. I feel I must acknowledge the role this film played in my coming out journey because it represented such a watershed and crystallizing moment of clarity for me. It was 1987 and I was 16. The only family I had in Johannesburg while I was studying at boarding school was my dad. By this point, he and my mum were taking a breather from one another, so they were formally separated. So I would stay with my dad on weekends at the simple council-style house he shared with his first wife in Lenasia, a then racially segregated Indian township south of Soweto. My dad's home was so not sexy, but I was grateful for the food and lodging, and it was such a welcome respite from the culture of crude, boorish masculinity of dormitory life. I had no friends in the neighborhood, and there were no amusements and distractions like movie houses or shopping malls in Extension 1 Lenasia back then. The only way to quell the boredom of a Saturday afternoon with nothing to do would be to read, watch TV, or rent a movie from the local video store. A 40-minute walk from my dad's house. A more dour, dingy, and depressing little basement video rental shop you could not imagine. The store was presided over by its owner, a thick-set, middle-aged Muslim man known only as Uncle, who gazed sternly and imperiously back at everyone from behind thick steel bars on an elevated platform and counter that you had to stretch upwards to reach with your cash and VHS tape of your choice. I hear you thinking, what's a VHS tape? Anyway, Maurice, the movie, I'm convinced, was especially dispatched by Providence, the universe, or some higher power precisely to meet me where I was at that particular stage of my gay identity development. I mean, a gay-themed period drama set in Edwardian times that did not enjoy mainstream cinematic release and distribution in a deeply homophobic South Africa under apartheid should really not have found its way to the shelves of an obscure, hole-in-the-wall rental shop in a deeply conservative Indian neighborhood. This was an establishment that only rented out mainstream Bollywood and Hollywood blockbusters after all. I mean, what were the odds that a gay art house film with male-on-male kissing action and nudity no less would wind its way to Extension 1 fricking Lenasia? It was a miraculous 1 in a gazillion probability. I hadn't read the book Maurice, which was fatefully enough published the year that I was born, much less even heard of the movie, but there it was, serendipitously and, as I said, quite incongruously nestled among such titles as RoboCop and Crocodile fucking Dundee. The cover sleeve of the tape featuring the two leads, James Wilby and a then relatively unknown Hugh Grant, is what immediately caught my eye. They were both so handsome and happened to share exactly the same hairstyle as mine at the time. And when I read the synopsis on the back sleeve and realized that this was a gay love story, I knew I had to watch it, despite the risk of outing myself to the uncle who knew my dad very well and would no doubt have alerted him to the sort of perverse content his teenage son was consuming. As I was checking out the tape, I carefully studied the old man's face to see if he registered that it was a gay film. I was so sheepish you'd swear I was buying condoms or something. "Oh, so you were like those arty-farty films," scoffed the uncle sarcastically. Phew, I thought relieved. Better arty-farty than gay. And so I rushed back to the house to watch it before my dad came home from work. Maurice was, and still is, a beautiful film with exquisite set pieces, sumptuous cinematography, an evocative soundtrack score, and wonderful performances. I was positively riveted from start to finish. Spoiler alert, Maurice tells the story of a young middle-class man, Maurice Hall, played by James Wilby, searching for his own identity within a society which denies romantic love between two men. In that era of stifling conformity, however, he meets fellow Cambridge student Clive Durham, played by Hugh Grant, and the two fall in love. Clive and Maurice continue their relationship in secret for years until Clive's desire to be normal prompts him to end the relationship, leaving Maurice heartbroken. In the final scene of the film, Clive, now playing it straight and married to a woman, gazes out of their matrimonial bedroom window at a vision or memory of Maurice when he and Clive were both in college together. In his mind's eye, Maurice smiles and eagerly gestures to Clive, beckoning him to join him, but then resigns himself to the fact that Clive is not coming, and so he retreats, waving goodbye as he fades out of frame. In the background, the soaring strings of Richard Robbins' stirring soundtrack score swell to their crescendo, and in that moment, something suddenly ruptured within me, and I experienced what I can only describe as a kind of seismic, explosive eruption of raw, unbridled emotion. The combination of having just watched for the very first time in my young life a lavish, beautifully crafted film that tenderly and sensitively portrayed homosexual love, culminating in this poignant moment when the two men must take leave of one another for good to live with the choices they've each made, unlocked something so powerful, so visceral from deep down inside me that came roaring and surging rather violently to the surface. I just spontaneously exploded into a paroxysm of tears. I remember melting off the couch, sliding to my knees and puddling into a fetal position on the living room floor as I bawled loudly and uncontrollably. I mean, just as well no one else was at home because it was so irrepressible, like a gushing open wound. At some point, my throat became so hoarse and inflamed that no more sound could come out of me, even as I continued to rock back and forth, still weeping. This unexpected outpouring or tsunami, seemingly out of nowhere, must have lasted for hours because by the time I started to uncoil from it, afternoon had become evening and the room was now plunged into darkness. I remember just sitting up and leaning against the front of the couch with my knees up and my head bowed down, just sitting there in the dark, staring into space, thinking, what the fuck just happened? I'd been completely blindsided and taken unawares. By this point, I felt utterly drained and spent. My gut and throat felt bruised and raw from all that thunderous wailing, and a dull ache taken hold in the pit of my stomach and stayed with me for the rest of the weekend as I tried to make sense of what this film had provoked or triggered in me. But by Monday, I'd started to make sense of it. Firstly, I realized that after all the years of homophobic abuse, cruelty, and degradation that led to bottled up pain, hurt, and anguish, the floodgates of emotional self-restraint had finally just burst wide open. And there was a huge sense of relief that came with that purging. I mean, everyone feels better after a good cry after all, but this was the first time in my life that I'd ever allowed myself to surrender to a proper, ugly cry. I had put up such a tough shell around myself for so long that I didn't know how to let go and be raw and vulnerable. It took a Merchant Ivory film to act as a catalyst for that emotional unraveling and release. Like I said, I'm convinced this film was sent to me by the gay gods. But that secondary lingering ache in the pit of my stomach that still remained was informed by something else. You see, it's funny, Maurice ends on an ostensibly happy note because he eventually finds love with Clive's gamekeeper, Alex Scudder, played by Rupert Graves, and they vow to build a life together, even as they know they live in a world that's openly hostile to their love. But instead of feeling joyful and elated, the film's ending left me feeling extremely sad and hollow inside. Partly because I was really invested in Maurice and Clive's relationship and was rooting for them to work out, but mainly because I knew that the path Maurice and Alec had now courageously charted for themselves was going to be mired with difficulties, hardship, and sacrifice. The movie and novel didn't explicitly forecast this, but they didn't have to. This was Edwardian England after all, and it occurred to me that in my time, in 1987 apartheid South Africa, laws and attitudes towards gay people hadn't improved at all since then, and that I would have to be very clear-eyed and sober about what was no doubt going to be a struggle and a tough, arduous future ahead as a queer, brown, working-class boy choosing to live authentically in a country that was cruel and hateful towards his kind. And that dull, lingering ache I felt was me grieving that. Just as Maurice had resigned himself to the fact that Clive was not going to be joining him at the end of the final scene, so too had I resigned myself to the dark and demoralizing prospect that life was always going to be hard for people like me. Of course, I'm happy to report I was proven very wrong, but my 16-year-old self didn't know that at the time, and that brutal reality check precipitated a period of deep depression, during which, it pains me to admit, I seriously contemplated more than once taking my own life. Thankfully though, that fatalistic bout of despair did not last long, and this is where I feel I must make honorary mention of Woodmead's guidance counselor, Ken Jennings, a man to whom I owe an enormous debt of gratitude. In my darkest hour of depression and suicidal ideation, I went to see Dr. Jennings for a couple of sessions, and he really helped to talk me off the ledge. He said 5 words that were a lifeline and a blessing to me in that lowest of low points. It's okay to be gay. Just hearing those words uttered for the first time from a trained professional and a heterosexual man, no less, was the validation and endorsement I so desperately needed at the time. "You're not the one with the problem," he added emphatically. "The society is. You just hang in there. It's going to get easier, I promise." In our final session, Ken spoke of how he and his wife looked forward to hosting me and my future boyfriend to dinner at their home one day in the not too distant time to come, and that kind gesture and mental image took me out of the present and into the future and actually brought me some comfort and hope in that dark night of the soul. So if you're out there watching this, Ken, thank you from the bottom of my heart. If I didn't adequately express my gratitude to you, then please know that your legacy and gift are not forgotten. Next up, coming out to my family.